Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. It's a Sunday evening this time. We're getting this done at a little bit after 4:30 p.m. and we're talking after a Kansas football win. The Jayhawks have won 3 straight games over ranked opponents. I know Fox was running with this is the first time any team has ever done this as a sub 500 team. I'm just going to run with the first time in program history Kansas has done it because history is a very long time and college
Yes.
football has been around for a long time. But for Kansas, a huge win. And obviously, we're joined by Kevin Flaherty to discuss everything about this game. Kevin, there's a lot to dive into with this game. I think we can get to some comments made during the week, how that bled over into the game. We'll talk about the game itself. And it really was a jam-packed game, Kevin, with storylines, top to bottom, right? You talk about great performances, uh, some really questionable officiating for both sides,
Yes.
some interesting, I think, post-game and pre-game comments. Like, we could go anywhere. I will give you dealer's choice again because I'm indecisive. And so you can pick where we start this week, Kevin.
Well, I will say your indecisiveness doesn't haunt you, and you put on a really good show for a jitterbug. No, it was kind of interesting because I think that the two programs kind of approached this game a little bit differently. But that was one of the things that stood out to me from the week was how often do you see an assistant coach or somebody at least related to the staff making comments
Yeah.
about an opposing player like that, and that was kind of shocking. I tend to think bulletin board material can be a little bit overrated. Like it's not like Jalon Daniels wasn't going to go out and try and have a big game regardless, right?
Yeah.
No. And so I do think that it does get a little. It really cracks me up when it's like the Super Bowl or something, and they're like, "Oh, he gave the other team bulletin board material." It's like he wouldn't have been trying to win the Super Bowl without the bulletin board material. But I still think that was something that was really interesting. You had Kobe Bryant's comments that I thought were really mild. It was
Yeah.
weird that people took that as trash talk because I actually thought it was kind of complimentary, where he
Mm.
was saying, "Hey, I'm really looking forward to playing against this guy because he's awesome." And then you have Travis Hunter's comments back, about like, come on, bro, stop talking trash. You're gonna have to double, like all the and so there was a little bit of extra heat in this one, although I didn't feel like Kansas was really supplying the heat, although maybe some people took Kobe's comments that way. There was a little bit of extra juice though.
Yeah, there was. Well, and here's the thing that I struggle with, Kevin, and we'll probably find this out as time goes on. And, if Deion Sanders does continue to stay as a head coach there, like over time, you'll get a feel for, is this what it's like every time, or is this just because of the game and everything around it? We can start at the beginning of the week then, because, what was it, Wednesday, I think, when Warren Sapp made his comments about the Kansas offense and Jalon Daniels. Look, I thought Warren Sapp was a defensive line coach at Colorado. Come to find out that he is actually an analyst.
Yes.
And that to me is the insane part of this. You've got an analyst on a podcast talking crap about, another team. And I understand Colorado very, very media forward, right? They want to be
Yes.
out there. They want to talk. They let people to practice. They let people film practice and post stuff. Totally get that. It's a new age of college football, right? You want to get your name out there. Well, there's some things like this that you can do that I think are honestly harmless. Like Arizona State
Yeah.
is having a great season, and reporters get to go see all of practice throughout the week. And guess what? They're still winning football games. So I understand where Colorado comes from with some of this. But what you can't do is go and say, and I will quote Warren Sapp right here, under 100 yards rushing, assault the quarterback. The word assault, really, if we're going to use the word assault, that's
Well,
tough. To quote Adam Scheffner, assault, like that. It's a heavy word. And so, look, that is something that clearly weighed in for these guys going into the game. And Devin Neal talked about it. Jalon Daniels talked about it. I can tell you that, from behind the scenes, like these guys were pissed off about it.
yeah.
And they did not like the fact that they felt like a team was coming in disrespecting what Kansas has been. And look, if you want to disrespect some of the turnovers that Kansas has had, or some of the lapses the offense has had in crucial moments, or if you want to talk about the defense struggling at times, okay. But you're going to talk about a top 10 rushing offense in the country like that? Like, that for me was the part where I'm like,
a
you go.
specific player too.
Yeah.
Like it would. I feel like it would be one thing if you were just kind of like, I expect our cornerbacks to do well against their receivers or something like that. And instead, it was very specifically aimed at one guy. And in addition to your thing, there was the comment about get the ball to your running back. Like you aren't made to handle what we're going to do to you. And saying, you can, if you carry the ball, we're going to get our licks in and we lick big or something like that. First of all, when you say lick big, like pause, like hold on, buddy. Like this is not the direction you want to be going with this.
Yeah.
But it was so stunning, right? Because I respect Colorado a lot. The turnaround that they've done, they look at things outside of the box. To your point, I think a lot of the media stuff could even help them in the long run because it puts a spotlight on that program that Colorado didn't have before, where recruits are looking at it and they're like, oh, I want to be a part of that, and all of those things. I think that Saturday aside, I actually think they've been a fairly disciplined program. You watch their defense, the way that they typically fill gaps against the run, things like that. I think there are a lot of positives there. And so I'm not inherently anti-Colorado at all, but it was really surprising to get those comments where you have somebody on staff, not a player, not somebody, calling somebody little, another team little brother or whatever when they're about to play them or any of the rivalry things or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody on staff. And let me ask you this real quick, and I don't. We aren't going to spend the whole podcast talking about this, but
we'll move on.
If it were any other analyst in the country, a guy not named Warren Sapp, he would have been fired before the game even happened.
Probably, kind of depends, but yeah. And I'll say this too, Kevin. Like, if you listen to what Deion Sanders had to say during the week, like, very respectful of Kansas, and obviously talked a lot about his relationship with Lance Leipold. Gave credit to Kansas after the game. Like, if this isn't trying to trash on Colorado, this is just saying what Warren Sapp did was insane.
Yes.
But then if you paid attention to what like Shadur Sanders put on Twitter, where he's like, what are you guys doing with these Kobe Bryant comments? The dude did not say anything notable. He was like, this is what it should be like. If you pay attention to what everything else was going on from Colorado in terms of, Deion Sanders, obviously Shadur, it was, I'd say, probably classy, honestly, because there wasn't much trash talking. Like, Deion did not come out and say, we're going to go do this, this, and this. It was like, he's going to have his team ready to play. And after the game, he gave KU their flowers. So it's just, it was something that added fuel to the fire for KU. And I think you could see that with the way that they started the game, that they were ready. And I thought this was super interesting that Lance Leipold mentioned this post game. Think about it, Kevin. KU came out and played like this after the guys got back to Lawrence at 6 a.m. on Sunday.
Yeah.
He was concerned about how is our effort level and intensity level going to be after, honestly, probably the hardest thing you're going to do as a college football team, which is go play a physical team on the road, come back on short rest, and go play arguably one of the most explosive teams where you have to be mentally disciplined all game. And I think perhaps the comments made during the week helped you get over a little bit of that tiredness and probably a little bit of that fatigue that you felt to get ready to go. And look, I mean, KU starts the game with the 51-yard touchdown to Devin Neal, a sign of what was to come from Neal. But Colorado struggled all year, covering running backs out of the backfield. And KU hits it first play, where it's really explosive. KU was able to move the ball a little bit, but then it's, first explosive play of the game, boom, out of backfield, Devin Neal. And the defense gets a stop. Like, it is literally, if you're trying to beat Colorado, and look, Colorado has had issues starting games slowly this year, especially on the road. It fit what Colorado's done, but Kansas needed to come out and I think control this game state, and that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, and to your point, and you do a great job, not just looking at the Pro Football Focus numbers, but giving your analysis of what maybe they got wrong, what they got right. One of the things I 100% agree with you is the offensive numbers were probably too low.
Yeah, that was weird.
But the other thing I agree with you on that I thought you made a great point about, one of the areas where the offensive grades were not low was the blocking on the outside. And those
Mm.
guys, kind of got their flowers in that regard. And to your point about the Devin Neal, swing pass, that was a great blocking job out there. Jared
Totally.
Casey kind of walls off some guys. Quentin Skinner has a great block out there. Trevor
Mm.
Cardell kind of takes a guy out of bounds.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the run, you have LJ Arnold, sprinting from across the field to try and give him that last little extra boost or whatever. And so I think, to your point about effort level, I think one of the things that stood out overall was Kansas's physicality in this game was terrific. But I think usually when you think about that, you think about the offensive line, and the offensive line was really good in this one. But you saw on that first touchdown to Devin Neal, the guys on the outside were going to make the blocks needed to make sure he was able to get stuff at the second level.
Yeah, and look, like Douglas Emillion always blocks hard. Like if you ever watch him play when he's out there, he blocks hard. But there was a play, I can't remember exactly when it was in the first half, but he basically had a Colorado guy and then just pancaked him. And then ended up falling over and like doing a somersault. But like it was the perfect encapsulation of what KU came out and tried to do, which was dominate physically. And Colorado just wasn't about it. They really weren't defensively. Like it started early where they were missing tackles. The PFF numbers on the missed tackle stuff is genuinely pretty crazy. I'm gonna see if I can find it here in a second, but I want to say 70% of KU's rushing yards, and KU had 331 rushing yards. 70% of them came after contact.
Yeah.
Like this was a game where you saw the physical development of this program where you think back, Kevin, to 2021, 2022, KU just really wasn't a consistent team up front and even playing through games. And here's a season where KU has been the more physical team, I think, in all but one game, the BYU game.
Yeah.
And that's a huge testament to how far things have come, where you think about 2020, how terrible the offensive line was. You think about year to year, how much this has improved. And I feel like this was, I don't want to say culmination because there's one more game to go. But if KU does the same thing against Baylor, a culmination where you've gone from being a team that just could barely compete physically when Leipold got here to a team that for most of the year was the more physical team. And that's what you can ask for. And I feel like that really, really showed up for KU, and they really challenged Colorado. And I think as the game went on, you really saw Colorado wilt. And so I think for KU getting off to this fast start was really critical because this is a Colorado team where you don't really want to get in a track meet with them.
Yes.
Because as you saw with Travis Hunter, like you give him one crease on a screen and it is 50 yards for a touchdown. And so KU, I think it was the perfect start. And you look at the first possession for Colorado. I put this on our VIP game thread. David Beatty would have loved that possession. Screen pass, deep incompletion. Was that a PI? I think Kobe got a little lucky there. Let's be real here. And it's a punt. And then KU goes down, and then Colorado is able to start to get some momentum. But I just think for KU, right, it was a good start to the game. And I think it was a forecast of what was to come where KU really was the more physical team. And I think another good example of that is that fourth down stop where you get third and short, KU's defensive line blows it up. Fourth and short, KU's defensive line blows it up. And I think Cornell or JB were there to stop it. So, like, it was literally the perfect start for KU against this team.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were bringing up the yards after contact. You rush for 130 yards, like it's a fantastic game. Devin Neal had 139 yards after contact.
Yeah, there you go.
And so when you look at that, and it wasn't just on offense, right? Like when you look at Colorado's leading rusher was Shadur Sanders, and they didn't call a single designed run that I can remember. It was all scrambles, and so. And it wasn't like he ran for a lot either. They had, I think, 16 yards on designed runs for the entire game. And I get Colorado is not a rushing team. Like, that's not necessarily what they do. I still think Colorado would have liked to have more than 16 yards on designed runs to try and take some of that heat off. But also potentially, Kansas had the ball for seemingly the entire game. I love the one stat, I think, I'm not sure how it finished up, but at one point, Kansas had more plays in Colorado territory than Colorado had plays overall. And when you look at the way the offensive line played, the way the blocking was there at the second level, the way Devin Neal repeatedly earned yards after contact, and even beyond that, Swain, Jalon Daniels had one of his best games in terms of running the ball, broke off a couple just absolute highlight runs, including, I think, on that second possession. I think, isn't that where he had like the spin and the 20-yard run or so that wound up setting up the field goal?
Yeah, exactly. And there was, broke a tackle, spin move, gets the first down. It was his season high in rushing, the most rushing yards he has had since, Kevin, we're going back a ways here, since the Duke game in 2022 when he had 89 rushing yards. So that just puts in perspective, right? Jalon has been a dual threat quarterback, but not to the extent that I think he showed. And, in the second half, KU did a little bit more of the, designed runs for Jalon, even a little bit in the first half. But that first run was a QB scramble. Devin Neal blocks for him really well. This was, I think, just top to bottom, a comprehensive team effort. But look, like Colorado had some moments there in the first half.
Yes.
Especially late on where you're thinking, or I shouldn't say I'm thinking, I've started to write some stuff, for post game. And I'm like, as halftime's coming, I'm like, ooh, am I going to have to tweak some of this stuff? Because obviously KU had some of its red zone struggles. We can get to that next, but Colorado started to move the ball. And that's what I find really interesting here, Kevin, and I'll pull up some of the advanced numbers here, is the fact that you look at success rate and Colorado is at 50% and KU's at 53%. And it just shows you that Colorado was a good offense and they played good offense. They just picked some terrible times to try and run the ball. Like trying to run the ball in that third and short that leads to the turnover on downs. You throw two screen passes there and, maybe you're able to get it because you got more talented players out there. But Colorado's an offense started to get things together. And Travis Hunter obviously had that screen pass for a touchdown. There was the other touchdown a little bit later in the first half. Like it still felt going into halftime, Kevin, like a little on the ropes. Like, this is feeling a little bit like some KU games earlier in the year where KU plays well early and then somehow kind of stumbles and finds itself in a one-score game or trailing at halftime. So I think you got to give credit to Colorado, but I think KU's defense in the second half did a good job of adjusting a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There were people at halftime that were tweeting out, hey, Colorado's going to win this game. And it wasn't necessarily something you had a great argument for. And I think part of it was what you were talking about with Colorado moving the ball to end the first half, but also Kansas's red zone issues in terms of having 3 trips inside the 10 that resulted in field goals. And there was starting to become a little bit of that anti-Jeff Grimes heat, online. And it's kind of funny looking back. I think the game plan was just about perfect in this one. If you're looking at the overarching thing, to your point, Swain, if you were to head into the game, the things that you would have said is we have to run the ball and we have to possess the ball because you don't want that Colorado offense on the field and you don't want to get into a track meet with that offense. The best defense against Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter is to have Shedeur Sanders over there on the bench and have have Travis Hunter playing cornerback, not catching passes. And so I thought the game plan overall was perfect. You can find issue with maybe a couple of those red zone calls with, hey, you could have done this a little bit differently. But overall, when you score on every possession except for the one where you take a knee to end the game, the offense has done its job and done it pretty well. I also thought too, Swain, in the second half, we saw Grimes getting into his bag a little bit more, where there was a little bit more creativity. I think that's where you saw the little tight end release where you had Devin Neal under center, handing the ball off to Jalon Daniels, who starts going to the left, rolls back around to the right, and finds Trevor Cardell. By the way, Trevor, not sure you should be trying to hurdle people. Like, I mean, it was fun. It was fun. But, for your health, I maybe would avoid that next time. The other thing I thought was interesting, because I think you and I are both on the same page on this one. Not a surprise given the officiating crew that the officiating crew is going to struggle in this one.
Yeah.
Dean Miller should have been ejected. And,
Yeah.
and I mean, we love Dean Miller. He's a great kid. His story is fantastic. In terms of a guy that just could not put on weight, was 180 pounds coming out of high school, couldn't really put on weight in junior college, couldn't put on weight initially at KU as well, and really put in a lot of work to make himself into the player that he did. I'm not sure how that wasn't at least a roughing the passer call, if not an outright ejection on that one. I felt like he got pretty fortunate on that.
Super lucky. And super lucky Shedeur Sanders didn't have his career ended. Like, let's be real here. That's one of those, if his feet are planted and stuck in the grass, like that's double knee, like everything. Like that was bad. And the fact that a flag was thrown
and then
picked up, like that was really bad.
And then, of course, later you have Shedeur Sanders pushing the ref and like nothing happening. I mean, it was just to your point, like I think both KU and Colorado fans were watching that game and they were just like, what in the world is going on with the officials here?
It's par for the course with Kevin Marr. Like I tweeted it. Like if you have any questions about why this game is being officiated weirdly, it's because it's the crew. It's the same crew that was in the middle of the whole BYU Utah controversy. Like this official has a track record of getting people really freaking pissed off at him over the years. And it's not like, oh, there was a holding. Like, no, it's big time stuff. Like they called back a touchdown, I remember, against Iowa State because a kid put his arms out in front of the end zone, like 2 yards before he got in the end zone. They called him for taunting. Called back a touchdown in a one-score game. Like, it's just insane, this officiating crew and how bad it is. So, like, yeah, Dean Miller, lucky to still be in the game. Shiloh Sanders, lucky to be in the game. Probably positive for KU because he's terrible. But, the officiating was terrible. And I understand, I think some Colorado fans were pissed off about Shedeur having a guy like Neum in the head when he's trying to get up.
Yeah.
Well, look, that's just a bunch of big guys trying to get up. But I understand if you're pissed off about that. If you don't see it, if like you're like Shedeur, you don't see it, or the official doesn't see it, I don't think it's a flag, but I get why Shedeur is pissed off in that moment. But yeah, Kevin, the officiating, I mean, like you just got to hope you don't have Kevin Marr on your games anymore, like because you're just going to get some weird stuff. Like I know fans, if you're watching at home, you're probably thinking that one where they called defensive holding against Kansas. You're probably thinking like, well, why'd that come so late? Well, the official threw it when it happened. Kevin Marr got tunnel vision thinking about the intentional grounding call against Shedeur Sanders. And then all of a sudden he calls it and the other official like runs like, dude, we got another flag. And he's like, oh, okay. And then has to do it again. So like, it was just terrible top to bottom. Yeah. Like it's just bad. And it's the same. It's bad that it's always the same crew, right? Yeah. You're like, oh, you got this official. It's just not going to be pretty tonight. Like that's not a great thing to have.
It was Big 12. It was like in baseball when you get Angel Rodriguez and you're just kind of like, well, he's going to miss some ball strike calls tonight and he's going to miss them by a pretty wide margin. So yeah, I mean, it was what it was, but I mean, I felt like you almost had to address that elephant in the room because certainly that hit on Shedeur was a major talking point. Everybody picked that up and was talking about it. Yeah,
rightfully so.
It was a bad hit. I still don't know how you throw the flag and then pick it up for roughing the passer and then there's nothing there. In the NFL, I mean, that would have taken a sizable chunk out of Dean Miller's paycheck, obviously. But he got to stay in. Shiloh got to stay in and keep playing. Shedeur got to stay in after pushing a ref, which is typically an automatic ejection. So they were consistent about keeping everybody in the ball game.
They let them play, I guess.
They let them play, even when they probably should not have.
I agree. Well, we can talk too about KU's job defensively with Shedeur Sanders. Oh, yeah. Look, it's such an interesting thing because you look at his numbers and you're like, oh, Shedeur Sanders threw for 266. He completed like 80-something% of his passes, and you're still coming out of the game like, KU did an okay job because of the fact that he didn't have ample time to go roll out and throw. Right. Those are the plays that kill you if you're a defense and have killed KU this year when quarterbacks are able to roll out and either scramble or throw a deep pass, KU did a great job of kind of keeping him in the tackle box where he had to play around crowds. And when he did have to scramble, it wasn't a easy rollout. It was a step forward, left, but he had to go diagonal and zigzag his way out of the pocket. So it takes some time. And he made some great throws, and Colorado's receivers made some great plays to get open. But I think KU, you can still say, in the grand scheme of things, did a solid job stopping a future NFL, probably first round pick at quarterback. And watching him move around, Kevin, he just looked like a pro. Like you can just see it. It felt like he was never sprinting or trying his hardest. And that just shows you at the speed of the game for him and how quickly it moves or how slowly it moves for him, that he's able to quickly move through progressions and read things and look as smooth as he did. So obviously I think he's a great player, but I think KU did a good enough job to slow him down in some key spots, especially in the second half when they're able to get that big sack.
Yeah, I know people were frustrated with the lack of pass rush, but pass rush was secondary to making sure that he didn't get outside of the pocket where he could extend plays, put guys into situations where you're saying, hey, I've got LeJontay Wester behind me. Shador's coming up. I need to decide if I'm going to carry Wester or, and let him scramble for a bunch of yards, or if I'm going to come up and risk having him throw it over my head. KU didn't face a lot of those choices because of the way that they kind of played it. It was cautious, yes, but at the same time, I think it ultimately wound up being the right thing. And to your point, Colorado scores on the first drive of the second half to make it 23-21. You're thinking, okay, this is maybe not the best thing in the world.
Yeah.
Kansas responds offensively and goes down and scores. But also, Swain, I don't think any of us felt like that was going to be Colorado's last points of the game.
No, definitely not. Well, and look, I think it definitely helps when you have a what would that have been? Was that no, that wasn't the 8-minute drive. That was the quicker drive. Yeah, that was so for me, that one felt like if KU scores here, they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because you're still keeping that 9-point advantage at that point in time. And that felt big. And I think the series then where it goes touchdown, forcing a punt from Colorado, which I think is when KU got that sack that I'm talking about. And then they have the 8-minute drive. Once the 8-minute drive happens, it's over because you could see Colorado start to wilt at that point in time. And it was what KU's missed this season, right? The defense getting a critical stop when it needed it. And that's just been missing for most of this year. And credit to KU. I thought they did some really interesting things, especially I think in the second half when some adjustments were made where KU started to play 3-down linemen and drop 8 guys into coverage and just say, pick us apart. And those 3 guys did a pretty decent job. I mean, there's one play where Blake Harold, my God, he rushes the passer from like a nose tackle technique, like spot on the defensive line. And then it's a screen pass. And then he runs 5 yards downfield to go tackle the wide receiver before anyone else gets there. Like, that was an incredible play I just thought of. But I think KU did some interesting things schematically that we really haven't seen, right? KU's typically been, kind of, I don't know about vanilla, but straightforward with what they do. In this game, you saw some different stuff, and I think that's a credit to the coaching staff for, I think, finding some interesting stuff in their game plan where they're able to force Shedeur to sit back there and pat the ball and try and pick KU apart. And he had some success, but not enough where KU's able to get, how many stops total over the course of the game, a handful. So I thought you got to give credit to the defense, the scheme, and the players.
The other part that relates to that, like you were talking about the offense being able to hold on to the ball, how many times this year has Kansas run the ball really well for 3 quarters, and then when they absolutely had to run the ball in the fourth quarter, the other team knew that KU wanted to run the ball in the fourth quarter. It wasn't there. And this one, Swain, and I think this was an example of why it was so good to run the ball so often, because those carries, they have that cumulative effect. The defense tires out when they're facing the run over and over again. You see that with Arizona State giving the ball to Scatterbo, pretty consistently. Is Scatterbo's not fun to tackle in the fourth quarter after you've been tackling that guy all game. And in this one, and it was something I feel like you saw more last year. Last year, there were a few games where Kansas closed it out with the running game, where the other team knew, hey, KU's going to run the ball here, and KU ran it anyway. I think this year you haven't really seen that as much, even though Kansas has been really physical, even though Kansas has been a really good running team overall, it hasn't necessarily manifested in the fourth quarter when you've needed to run the ball. You have that really long drive to put yourself up, 2 scores basically at 16. And then you have that final drive where you get a few first downs to give yourself a chance to kneel on the ball. And so the defense did a great job. The offense also did a really good job of, hey, we need to run some of this clock off. And they absolutely did that.
Exactly. You're right, Kevin. And I think it was the moment would have been at the end of the third quarter, going into the fourth quarter, right, where they have the TV timeout. I think they played the song they played for the KU basketball games in the fourth quarter. And you could just see the KU sideline, the KU fans in the stands were hyped up. And you could just see there was no juice on the Colorado sideline. No juice. And it was guys kind of just trudging back to the sideline. And that was for me the moment where it's like, okay, yeah, these guys are cooked. They're not stopping KU because you have to have juice if you're going to try and overcome a physicality disparity like Colorado had all game. And KU did a good job. I had to go down to the media room to get like set up for the post game stuff. And so I'm like half getting all my stuff ready and half like watching the game. And the fact that, like, for example, like KU goes for it on that fourth down and short, that's one of those got to have it moments. And KU did because they had been the more physical team. There's the Devin Neal, I think his fourth touchdown, where, it's a 3rd and goal from the 1. And you're thinking he's getting 2 touches, or at least I was thinking he was getting 2 touches there. He gets in on the first one when he dives in. Like, there were a couple of those got to have it moments kind of late in the third quarter into the fourth quarter where KU's offense, I think, has sometimes struggled. And in this game, they answered it to a T. And I think it's one of those days for KU where they had an advantage, and credit to Jeff Grimes for leaning into it, where you didn't see a lot of that stuff in the second half where you're like, why'd KU pass twice there on first and second down, right? What's the point in that? So just, I think KU did a great job.
Yeah, and you look at, I think out of the final 20 minutes, KU had the ball for something like 14 and a half of them. So when you look at that, it's kind of hard for Shedeur Sanders to connect with his receivers and take advantage of that secondary when you're in a situation where you don't have the football. And credit to the defense for getting the stop on sort of the 1 4th down or fourth quarter possession that they faced. Colorado was able to move the ball a little bit, had like a 12 play, I think 46-yard drive, and then Kansas just kind of shut the door there. I mean, you had the sort of 3rd and 17 that turned into a 4th and 17, and then they had the false start where you're facing a 4th and 22. You get off the field and Colorado didn't see the ball again, and so they did a great job of having a game plan on both sides of the ball that I think put them in the best position to win this thing. And ultimately, their physicality was just really impressive in this one.
It really was. And I think there are a couple of guys that need a shout out. Obviously, Jalon Todd, first career start, and you couldn't notice him on the field. And I think that's all you can ask for sometimes, Kevin, with young players, especially on defense. Can we not notice you?
Yeah.
Because I think so often, and I think about this with Taylor Davis and Jalon Todd in this instance, I think so often with young players, think about Kobe in his freshman year or Melo in his freshman year, like you notice them because you're like, oh God, he just got beat.
Yep.
But there really weren't that many moments with either Todd or Taylor Davis. And I know Taylor Davis only played a handful of snaps, but you didn't really notice them that much.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the opposite on the defensive line, where like you want to notice them, and you see that with Blake Harrell, where you do notice him at times during a game. But I think Jalon Todd deserves a ton of credit, and Calvin Clements too, for stepping in for Logan Brown. And look, Logan deserves some flowers as well. Injures, I think it's his knee at BYU, goes back in the game, plays really well, and then injures. It looked like his ankle, just based on, or ankle or foot, just based on he was wearing a boot on the sideline. and was in street clothes. And Daryl Paulson went over and talked to him for a little bit. But Calvin Clements, I thought, looked pretty good. There was the one moment where there's the false start that he had, and he goes and blows the guy up, and the guy flops a little bit. But I
Yeah.
thought Calvin continues to show, and it's almost like this is a great situation for him, where it's not the pressure of starting every game over the course of a season. But at this point in time, I can see if I can pull up the stats real quick, but it feels like Calvin's played maybe 100 snaps or so this season, and that's something for him where that's valuable experience because KU's going to lose one of its tackles, and Bryce
Yeah.
Cable do, and obviously someone like Logan Brown has a decision. He went through senior day. He technically should have a year next year because of last year. There's the belief he may get a medical red shirt, and then you look at Calvin, right? Yeah, so 115 snaps this year. Like those are important snaps for him because they've come in critical moments. So, for him to continue to show, I think a steady hand is really important. So just a couple of guys I feel like deserve a shout out from this game. And it's pretty positive for KU that you can start to see some of that first recruiting class start to show through, whether it be Blake Harold, you can think about someone like Taylor Davis, obviously, Calvin Clements as well, a little bit there. And then now you look at the true freshman class. You got someone like Jalon Todd that's playing. John Kamara is on special teams right now. Like you're starting to see some of those younger guys get roles, which is really important. So it's just more positive stuff for KU right now.
Yeah, and to your Taylor Davis point too, I felt like that was another check mark in Brian Borland's direction, in that to be able to see this and say, "Hey, this is a game where we need Marvin Grant playing a different role," and
Yeah,
so
totally.
he was back playing more of a safety role than he has in recent weeks. That
Mhm.
obviously means fewer snaps for Taylor
Mhm.
Davis. To your point, Taylor Davis did fine. Like when he was out there, you didn't notice him, and that's a good thing. But I do think that they did a good job of saying, hey, what we really need on the field now is not Marvin Grant as a nickel safety. We need an actual nickel cornerback. And Jalon Todd to be able to slide to the inside when he's played some on the outside at times this year, too. You don't necessarily have a ton of freshman corners that can do both. And I think he's had some good moments doing both.
Yeah, and obviously, as the pass breakup on that fourth down, Kobe Bryant gave him a hard time after the game, being like, "You got to catch that, but it's okay. I believe in you. You'll get it next time." I did think that was interesting. Moving to the post game stuff, in the tunnel coming off the field, Jalen Daniels, says, "How about those spin moves for a jitterbug?"
Yeah.
Um, that was interesting. And then I think Devin Neal's interview, he went for 10 minutes, which is really long for some of these players, but
Yeah.
he went for 10 minutes, and I think you could really grasp what the day meant to him, what the comments we talked about pregame, how those impacted things, and you get some more insight into Devin as a person. And I think you can just continue to be impressed by him off the field, on the field. Like he has been a great ambassador for Kansas. Uh, he's going to have a statue. It's just a question of where. And he has been the right person at the right time for Kansas. And I just think if you watch this game and then you go and watch that post game interview with him, you really see everything about Devin and who he is and all that stuff. So I thought that was interesting. And then Jalon, classy, I think in his post game didn't, say anything bad, but was like, yeah, when he got sent the clip of the Colorado coach saying that, he's like, what? A jitterbug? Okay. I think it was Ben Easters that sent the Warren Sapp clip to
Yeah.
him. And obviously, I think the KU players handled things well. Obviously, it wasn't much like trash talking. It was more just like, look, we have confidence. If you're going to try and disrespect us, that's not something we're going to tolerate. And Devin, I think, almost quoted Dan Lanning by saying we talked with our pads. But yeah, overall, I think it was a interesting post game. One of the more interesting ones I think we've seen this year.
Yeah. Also, we haven't mentioned, I thought the crowd was terrific. I thought it was probably the best atmosphere of the Arrowhead games, I would say. And the reason I thought of it was you talking about Devin Neal, because
Mm,
obviously you've got a senior day that stretches out pretty much the entire field with all the seniors that they
yeah.
had. Devin was the guy that closed it out. He was the final guy that they announced, and the crowd really let him know, how much they appreciated everything
Mm.
that he did. And that was before what was probably the best game of his career. Would you say better than the Oklahoma State game? I mean, he had 100 yards receiving against Oklahoma State, but he only had 1 touchdown. So with 4 touchdowns, 80 yards receiving in the same area for rushing yards, might have been best game of Devin Neal's career.
I think if you were to watch both games and ask which one was better, I think the Colorado one, just you factor in the missed tackles,
Yeah.
the gotta have it plays. Like KU was up big against Oklahoma State in that game. And I know KU ends up being kind of up big in this one, but like it got tight at times in this game. And
Yeah.
that Oklahoma State game, at least from my memory, I don't remember that one being at least super tight. KU jumped out to the early lead and really
Yeah.
never looked back. But yeah, I think so. I think you give it to him. That's maybe if we get to talk to him again, we'll have to ask him if he has a favorite game from his career.
I know the
What he
numbers
thinks is the
weren't
best
the same, but the K-State game last year,
one. Yeah.
he didn't have the numbers like he did in this one. But with the situation, with you having a true freshman walk on out there at quarterback in his first start in a rivalry game, that was pretty impressive too. But yeah, it would be great to see Devin Neal get a statue for all the reasons that you mentioned, not just all-time leading rusher,
Mm.
but a Lawrence kid, who's been so involved in the community, the way that he's represented the program. I know maybe some people might say, well, you got John Riggins and Gale Sayers, and nothing against guys like that. But like Devin Neal is kind of Mr. Jayhawk, if you will. And so I know that they won't have a statue out there ready and waiting when they unveil the new booth, but it would be kind of cool if there was something there where they had like a little pavilion or an area or something like that wound up having a Devin Neal statue at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be cool. I think at some point it'll happen, but this is a long time, right? This is something where if we're talking statues, we're talking, Devin's retired from NFL. He's got a family.
Yeah.
Like, they like to wait, but it's very clear. Like he is just an iconic player, and he will be the face, I think, of this current era of KU. And obviously, what makes this time right now for Kansas football so interesting is we really are about to see the kind of the next iteration,
Yeah.
Of this program, because it has been really Devin's program over the last couple of years. And if you want to broaden this out, right, it is this 2020 class that has been the face of Kansas football over the last 5 years. And now you're moving into a spot where it's going to be new players. And who those players are, I don't think you can really say right now, because you got to see who steps up, who gets recruited, who are some of those guys. I think fans probably have ideas of who they want it to be, but college football is not a linear thing. And yeah, we'll just have to see how that plays out. But it is interesting, Kevin, now that we're talking about maybe big picture stuff with KU, that we are kind of winding down this era.
Yeah.
And it's one that will be thought of as the turning point from Kansas. And there's going to be a stadium that recognizes that. I think that part's pretty cool. Not everyone can get a statue, but I think anybody who has played for the team in the last couple years can say, right, and Jalon Daniel said this, that people can say they laid a brick. And when you bring your kids back to a Kansas football game in however many years, down the road, those players can say, yeah, like I helped build this. I was a part of those teams. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And now we're just going to enter into a different era where those new players are going to get to play in the stadium and create good memories for fans and for students and for everyone alike. And I think that's just an interesting way to look at kind of this thing as this season winds down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even going big picture, but sooner into the future, Kansas still bowl eligible. Still bowl eligibility alive is what
There you go. I was going to say, whoa, they're bowl eligible. That's news to me.
not bowl eligible. I meant to say bowl, that it's still available to them. Baylor's kind of similar to Kansas in that had kind of shaky quarterback play early on. They actually switched to Sawyer Robertson and have been a lot better since then. They've been one of the best offenses in Big 12 play, and they've won 4 or 5 straight themselves, at 5 straight. And so when you look at that, you're one game away from bowl eligibility. And I know we've talked about the value of the bowl practices. I think this year, maybe more than any other year, those practices could be totally invaluable, because you're going to have a lot of young players that aren't playing a major role on this year's team that are going to be depended on real fast. And so getting to get some practice snaps to John, to DJ Warner, who's potentially going to take on a bigger role, by Joe, all the guys, especially on defense. I think that could be huge for them if they're able to get those bowl practices. And so you're heading into the Baylor game hot. Baylor obviously hot as well, but you've got a lot to play for.
Yeah, you do. And let's go here, Kevin. Is this the biggest game of Lance Leipold's time at Kansas?
Yeah, because even the Oklahoma State game, which I would have said was the biggest game, that was a game where you still, even if you lose that game, there are still a couple games after that where you could potentially achieve bowl eligibility. It was huge afterwards because you won the game you looked at it and you said, okay, we're bowl eligible now. In this case, I think with the response that KU's had to being 1-5, to be able to come back and make a bowl game, I would be so interested to see how the opt-out situation goes, because on one hand, more players are opting out, but with this group, with everything they went through with guys like Devin Neal, I don't know that many would opt out. It might be like that Bryce Young Alabama team where they played the bowl game against K-State and they didn't really have a whole lot of opt-outs. They were basically like, no, we're playing in this thing. And so I think that this is probably heading into the game, the biggest game. And I think another thing too, and people may not care about this, Swain, I know I'm usually pretty good as a KU football historian, at least in the Big 12 era, and I can't go back way further than that. I think this is KU's chance to, for the first time in the Big 12 era, have back-to-back winning seasons in conference play.
Ooh, all right. Give me a second. I can look that up for you. Interesting. Yeah. So
like I said, like that's not necessarily something where it's like everybody jumps around and says, "Oh, that just made my year," knowing that. But at the same time, I do think when you're recruiting, when you're doing different things, when you're selling your program, the ability to basically say, hey, we had winning records in the Big 12 multiple years in a row. This is how we're trending.
Yeah.
I believe it's the first time in the Big 12 era.
Dang, Kevin.
Did I hit it?
You're all right. So we can, all right. Semantics. I love semantics. 4-4.
They were 500, I believe, in 2006.
So here it is. So it's 2007. They're 7.
2007, they had a winning record.
2008, they were 4-4. Are we going to count 4-4? Is it a winning record? It's not a losing record.
It's not a winning record in conference play. It's 500. It's right there. Yeah. Right. And so that was part of my. What were they in 2006? Because they were right around 500 in Big 12 play.
3-5.
3-5. Yeah. They would have been better in 2006, but they had injuries. Not that anybody's wanting us to talk about the 2006 Kansas Jayhawks on this podcast, but I don't think 4-4 is a winning record. That's 500, and so
I think you're right, but I'll be devil's advocate here.
There you go. So yeah, I think that you could maybe get a couple winning records if you go like deeper into Big 8 or maybe even Big 7, Big 6 era stuff. But it's not going to be easy, even then.
It's not. I'm scrolling through right now, Kevin.
Maybe in the 50s or
we're going 80s, 500.
I don't think they would have done it in the 80s.
No. 70s. Oh, here we go. No, two. Yeah, Kevin. Oh, there you go. 1967. 1968. This is a pretty good. Now this is great, Kevin, because we're doing the research for me right now. So if this does happen, I'll have some great stats for post game. That'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. And I will not mention this outside of the podcast so that this thing is strictly right there for you. But no, like I said, like it's not something that people would necessarily go around being like, oh my God, KU, winning record in conference play, first time in however long. In back-to-back years, but it's something that Lance Leipold and that staff can point to as not just, hey, 2023 was a great year for us, but also this thing is relatively consistent in the way we're building it.
Yeah, exactly. And so real quick, I want to go back, Kevin. Bowl game, there'll be a lot of opt-outs.
Do you
I
think
put
so?
I
Yeah.
put good money on it.
Yeah.
There'd be a lot of opt-outs. But still, the benefits of getting to the bowl game are insanely positive. And so I think I'll probably put this on the old Twitter machine, and I'm sure it'll get great reviews. But biggest Kansas game since ... And I'd be really interested to see what people say, because it feels like, I mean, like biggest in a long time. So I'd be really interested to see what kind of fans say. So if you're listening to this right now, go to my Twitter account. You can reply to that, and we can get a kind of fan vibe and see what people think, because it feels big.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested to see, because this is the thing that is cool about a team that is in situations like this. And theoretically, KU would probably like to be in situations where we're talking about the biggest game of Lance Leipold's tenure, or must win games being playoff games, or a
Yeah.
Big 12 title game, or a game to go to the Big 12 title game. But baby steps, and this game is going to be pretty big. And I'll be very interested to see how this team does in terms of how it comes out prepared, because it has been an emotional 3 weeks. And now
Yes.
you're going on the road to play an 11 a.m. game on, on Thanksgiving weekend. It's not going to be a super juiced up crowd.
On Baylor's senior day.
Yeah,
there's reasons for Baylor to be very up for this one as well. And so, yeah, it's a tough one. The funny thing is, Kansas could wind up going to a bowl game, Swain, and their bowl opponent could be their easiest opponent in like 5 weeks, because of the way that they ended the year. So it's not an easy close. I also, after 41 touches, I hope that Devin Neal got in the ice bath like immediately after coming back to Lawrence, because they may need to give Devin the ball quite a few more times against Baylor as well.
Yeah, I think so. Well, they've got the cryo chamber now, which
Yes.
obviously really helps. And they got, I'll tell you, guys, like at some point we'll get a facilities tour, I think, once the whole thing's done. But it's sounds like they've got a lot of great stuff for recovery and all that. So let's just put it this way. I think 3-4 years ago, this performance from KU would have been very different after what the last couple weeks had looked like. And
yes,
it worked out well for KU. So that's what I got, Kevin. I mean, any other things we haven't really covered? I feel like we got a lot done today.
No, yeah, I think we covered a lot of different things, I think we covered big picture stuff too, and this is something that would not have seemed feasible when Kansas was 1-5, and it was easy to ask, kind of, hey, what's the mood in the locker room? Is this thing getting away from you? And to the coach's credit, to the players' credit, they repeatedly said, nope, like everybody's just putting their head down and working. And I don't think the last 3 weeks would have been possible if they didn't stay engaged in that way. And you look at what happened to some other programs, including Oklahoma State in the Big 12 this year, when things started to go wrong, things really went wrong. I think it really is a testament to the culture that the coaches established, but also the players established and are living out.
Exactly. And I think I've written this a couple of times. Like the end of this season was always going to dictate, right, where this program really is at.
Yeah.
Because you can have the highs, but how like low are the lows in terms of a season's worth of data? And the fact that things went poorly for KU over the first half of the season and they rebounded to be where they're at, regardless of what happens against Baylor. If they lose against Baylor, the last few weeks are still the last few weeks. And you saw a team out there competing their tails off, despite the fact that the goals they had at the beginning of the season weren't super attainable. And I think that in and of itself is super encouraging and tells you about the culture that KU has and how player driven it is. And obviously, as you rotate through players and you cycle through these classes, it's going to be important next year that there's a different group of players that are ready to step up for KU. Now, I will say before we wrap this up, if you have made it 55 minutes into this podcast, I'll let you in on a little secret. We're going to have a Black Friday sale going on for VIP starting, I think, Tuesday, but for sure check back on like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this week. And it's our best sale of the year. It's like 75% off. You're getting VIP for less than $3 a month. I mean, we can run through it real quick. Like, you're going to get all the portal stuff from football. You're going to get yourself through basketball season, through basketball portal season, all the way through football fall camp, and all the way through next season. Like, that's a pretty good deal in terms of, what you're going to get signing up for less than, I think, it's easily less than $5 a month. I think it's about $3 something. And so, look, stay on the lookout for that. That's going to be a great deal. You're going to want to take advantage of it because there's a lot of stuff going on in the world of Kansas. And look, college athletics is now a 12-month-a-year sport. And there is going to be so much going on between everything. And you're going to want to be a part of it. So just keep an eye out looking for that.
National Signing Day coming in another week.
Oh, yeah, that's a thing too.
So if they sign up for it, they will be there and get all the latest recruiting news, understand a lot more about this class, the stories that built it, and all that good stuff. You do a great job with that, Swain.
Oh, thanks, Kevin. Well, let's wrap it up now. Kevin, where can folks find you?
Yeah, you guys can find me over at Kansas City Sports Network. Have a KU podcast called Pay Heed, and then a local recruiting podcast where we look at Kansas City, Kansas kids, all that stuff called Verbal Commitment with Ryan Wallace, your teammate over at Go Power Cat. So it's a good time.
Awesome. Well, thanks a bunch, Kevin. As always, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're watching this on YouTube. Thanks a bunch as always. Crazy week on YouTube. Maybe it'll be less crazy this week, but keep clicking, keep liking, keep commenting, keep subscribing. If you're listening on a podcast platform of choice, thanks as always for listening. Please leave a rating and review. Those go a long way in helping us with the old algorithm. For Kevin Flaherty, I'm Michael Swain. Thank you so much for listening to the Fog.net podcast. We'll talk to you all later this week. And if not, we got to figure out what the schedule is going to look like. But if not, definitely next Sunday, Kevin and I will be back.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for watching. Have a good week.